All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for January 28th. It's a very special day here in the committee because we have a birthday boy. Happy birthday, Delegate Jacobs. Maybe less special, but also important, we have part 4 of our Maryland's Energy Landscape series. We have various stakeholders joining us today. We will start, if they're here, with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, or are they doing remote? They are joining us remotely. So we have Kathy Magruder, their executive director, and perhaps assisting her is the very well-named Pamela Powers. Go ahead when you're ready, Kathy.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman and distinguished members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kathy Magruder. I serve as executive director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which is an instrumentality of state that was created in 2009 by the General Assembly. Thank you for the opportunity to present to this body today and virtually at that. Next slide, please. We are governed by a 9-member board of directors and act as the Green Bank entity for the state. These directors are appointed by the governor. We were created with an economic development mission. We produce an annual report and audited financial statements, which are filed with the Department of Legislative Services and available for your reference online. Next slide. We were asked by staff to talk about some key topics today, and the question was asked about what do we believe the main factors are that are driving utility affordability. From our perspective, energy costs have risen significantly because of greater and increasing demand versus the available supply, inadequate transmission capacity to serve the required load, and weather extremes like we've been seeing this past week and over the summer. Next slide, please. We were also asked to talk about what we think needs to be done to improve affordability for consumers. And we think in focusing on the consumer audiences listed on the right to improve affordability in relation to their energy costs, we believe investments need to be made to implement building energy performance and energy efficiency measures, deploy solar with battery storage, provide access to affordable financing solutions, and technical assistance readily available to implement solutions, and finally, support the commercialization of cutting-edge technologies that will address challenges more effectively in the future and create jobs. Next slide. What I wanted to tell you today overall is among the challenges that we face is that the state has a fractured and inefficient strategy for the use of limited public funds for investment in projects and measures. We are not recycling the funds. We need to target the limited public investment that we have available to leverage a greater share of private capital to finance these solutions. We're finding that the shift in federal policy and funding priorities has reduced access to these resources, and that communities that are challenged to implement measures are facing limited capacity. They need technical procurement and financing assistance. Next slide. I wanted to share this with you so that you could understand where the money comes from to fund climate solutions and clean energy projects. This state collects over $1.2 billion in various sources of funding for clean energy and climate solutions. The pie on the chart shows on the right-hand side, the dark blue section is the Empower Ratepayer Surcharge. The orange slice of the pie is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative revenue, and the blue section of the pie is the alternative compliance payments that are collected by the state. The green slice represents the interest that is earned as those funds are sitting in the Strategic Energy Investment Fund accounts. And the little purple slice of the pie is the amount of funding that we dedicate to, in a given year, to the efforts of the Green Bank in leveraging and recycling capital. That total is less than 3% of the overall pie. Next slide, please. So what is a Green Bank and what do we do? In general, when capitalized with some public funds, a Green Bank uses that investment to attract private capital to achieve environmental and social policy directives, which might not otherwise occur if left only to private investors. We are a complement to the private lending community, not a competitor. The next slide, please. What I wanted to share with you is why this matters, because the clean energy sector is an economic engine for the state. Over the past 17 years, MCEC has driven economic growth in this space for Maryland. A recent study by Salisbury State University indicates that approximately $28 million invested in MCEC over the past 17 years has resulted in over $621 million in total statewide economic impact, over 3,000 jobs supported across the state, $236 million in labor income generated, and finally and importantly, to the state and local governments, $82.2 million in state and local tax revenue collected and contributed. For every dollar MCEC receives from you, $21 is returned to the state's economy. We also track, in the next slide, you'll see, economic impact metrics. The next slide, thank you. And environmental impact metrics. What I wanted to share today that's important is with approximately $24 million over the past 17 years in public fund invested, MCEC has leveraged over $240 million in private capital to deploy measures. We've also captured over $136 million in federal and private grants to help fund this work. Please go to the next slide. I talked a little bit earlier about technical and procurement support. As a neutral third-party entity with a nonprofit interest, we are able to assist municipalities, both large and small, help procure services and manage projects. This is important because these procurements have generated over $73 million in contracts that are employing people across the state because this work is done largely in the state. This has resulted in over 114 million kilowatt hours of energy demand reduction, 8.63 million in cost savings for those consumers, and 4,545 metric tons of CO2 avoided, all while achieving our MBE contracting goals. Next slide, please. This slide is fairly simple. It just outlines some of the projects that our Procurement and Technical Assistance Division has supported in the past couple of years. I wanted to mention that we are working in places all over the state. In the interest of Delegate Jacobs' birthday, one of our most favorite projects recently is work for the town of Chestertown, where we're helping them procure services, design services, and financing for a 2-megawatt community solar project that will help bring affordable energy to low-income homeowners in the Chestertown community. We've also done work in towns like Easton to develop microgrids and done energy performance contracts for Baltimore City Public Schools. Next slide, please. We run a series of financing programs that help us address different consumer audiences. We use our Maryland Clean Energy Capital Program and our bond issuing authority to finance large-scale projects on institutions, schools, and universities. Through MD PACE, which is the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing Program, we've helped administer financings for over $150 million in transactions across the state, most recently the Paramount Theater in Baltimore. We've done almost $10.5 million in transactions through the C3 or Climate Catalytic Capital Fund. And with a focus on helping homeowners, MCEC partners with the Montgomery County Green Bank and utilities across the state using Empower ratepayer dollars to make the lowest cost loan possible to homeowners that want to do energy efficiency improvements and replace heating and cooling systems that are no longer efficient. Next slide, please. This is just a map showing where the large-scale bond issuance projects have taken place. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is a map of the enabled counties in the state who offer the commercial PACE lending program. The green counties are the ones that are administered in partnership with Maryland Clean Energy Center. Montgomery County and Prince George's County administer their own programs. Let's go to the next slide. So this program, which I mentioned earlier, is helping homeowner consumers. And I ask you the question, if your heating or cooling system broke down and needed to be replaced today, what would you do? Do you have $20,000 sitting around in a bank account that you would just pay cash for it? Most of us don't. I certainly don't. So this program gives access to 0% loans for up to 24 months and financing up to 10 years beyond that for homeowners to do those types of improvements when a credit card rate would be somewhere between 14 and 23% today. Let's go to the next slide. This slide is a map of the charging infrastructure that we're working to deploy using federal grant funds. This is just the $15 million grant for community charging stations. We just also have confirmed another $33 million for installation of charging infrastructure on corridor sites across the state. And this is all done with partners in the private sector who are helping cover over 80% of the cost of each of those chargers. Let's go to the next slide. As part of MCEC's mandated statute, we are required to help advance and commercialize innovative new technologies in the clean energy space. This slide shows some of the impact results from this work being done through our subsidiary, the Maryland Energy Innovation Accelerator. But the next slide, if you would go to that, please, is more exciting. These are the types of companies and startups that are advancing more sustainable building materials and solutions, capturing carbon, storing, making, and managing energy with cutting-edge technologies. Companies like TerraFusion, who are developing next-generation fusion reactor in Maryland using technology discovered and developed at the University of Maryland. The company is commercializing an innovative plasma confinement approach to deliver low-cost fusion energy with the potential to transform the energy grid. MEIA, our subsidiary, has recruited TerraFusion's current COO and is supporting the company's fundraising and scale-up efforts. Next slide, please. So this is the slide I wanted to leave you with today. When you think about everything that I've just shared with you and the work that we're doing and the results that we're getting, we're doing that with an annual budget for operating commitment of only $1.2 million a year from the state. In the past several years, we've been able to capture funds for the Climate Catalytic Capital Fund, for supporting our commercialization work. We have $5 million to be used from FY25 through FY28. And we've been using the Empower Ratepayer Surcharge grant of about $2 million to leverage the private sector investment in loans for consumers. Just recently, MEA granted the Clean Energy Center $5 million for two funds that would help projects that are otherwise not going to be able to take advantage of the production tax credit, which expires this July, move those projects further and faster forward so they would be able to use that as part of their project pro forma. What we're looking for is on the bottom line. We're looking for an increase in our operating budget so that we can do more to help consumers with affordability and to help them be able to adopt clean energy solutions that will help them reduce their bills. There is a bill proposed that is coming in front of your committee, two bills in the next couple of weeks. House Bill 119 proposes to add $1.5 million annually to our budget to create a team of project navigators that would be boots on the ground in communities to help with that procurement and technical assistance to get projects ready to be financed. We're also looking for House Bill 245 to transfer the lot and loan program from MEA to MCEC so that we can use that loan program to help fund these types of projects once they're designed and ready to be funded. The governor's budget does commit funding for us in fiscal 27. We're grateful for that. And there's a bill pending on the Senate side that would allow another $5 million a year for nonprofits to get loans for energy efficiency measures. And then next slide. And finally, we invite you to please join us on February 19th for our annual legislative reception to meet with industry stakeholders from your districts. An invitation should be coming to you soon via email. Thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions while we're here.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Are there any questions for the Maryland Clean Energy Center? Delegate Fraser Hidalgo. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kathy, good to see you. Thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of quick questions. You talked a little bit about the green energy banking and your relationship with MoCo and what their green energy bank, the green banking that they're doing. When you consider where you are with, like, do you know how many particular loans that you did could you specify like the number of specific loans?
So the consumer loans that we've done through the CEA program are approximately 500 since 2022. We did about 3,000 before that with an M-Help program that was funded with ARA money back in the day between 2011 and 2017. And then now we are making loans and investments through the C3 fund. So, I'm going to say somewhere in the range of 3,600 loans.
Okay, and what is your basis for your loans? Like, where do you get that money? Does that come from CEF money or where?
No, so what we're using CEF money or Empower Ratepayer dollars or federal grants to attract private capital to make those loans. So the loans are being made with, not with public money. And that's the advantage here, is that we're using a little bit of public money to bring that private capital into the room so that we're not counting on public dollars to take the risk or
Right.
make the loans. And what our money does is help buy down the risk for the lender and helps buy the rate down for the consumer.
Okay, and lastly, you gave a quote of $1 equates to $21 a return for the state's economy. Just very
That's
quickly,
correct.
how did you calculate? Because that's 21 is a very specific number, so I'm
It
curious
is,
as to
and
how you got
the
it.
magic, Delegate, the magic of that would have to be, we'd have to get more specificity from Beacon, Salisbury State's Economic Impact Studies
They're the
group.
ones that do, okay.
They use an in-plan model to model those impacts, and with input from us on our spend. And I'm sure that they could explain that at great length, but the in-plan model is the one that we use to do that calculation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Ziegler.
Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very impressive. I wondered if you could expand a little more on microgrids. I happen to live in Howard County, so I'm particularly interested in that one, but just in general, if you could say a little more about what they do, what they're for.
Right. Thank you, Delegate Ziegler. We're happy to be working with the team in Howard County. They're real leaders in the state on this. So a microgrid is an energy generation capability that would be connected to a building and with battery storage, allow the building to island or operate off of the grid if necessary. These types of energy generation and storage, building energy management combinations give some resilience, particularly to critical infrastructure like wastewater treatment plants, jails, emergency services facilities. And I'm not sure exactly where the Howard County study is looking to build one, but a good example of why this is helpful based on our recent weather experience. During Superstorm Sandy, the only facility at that time that was operating and had lights and the ability for emergency responders to charge communications equipment and for hospitals to operate was Yale University, because they had built a microgrid and were able to come off the grid, operate as an island, and provide that service. So now communities like Howard County or smaller government entities that have those critical facilities are starting to understand that they can be generating energy advantageously when there's not a crisis, but be prepared to respond when there is.
Vice Chair Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here and educating us about your program. I was not aware of all these wonderful loans that you have and the support that you give to consumers in particular. I know that a lot of people right now are struggling with this weather to improve their systems. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the 500 loan number that you just shared with my colleague for funds to improve for homeowners. Is that's since 2022? Is that accurate? Okay. Is that actually over or underutilizing the funding available there, or are people on a waiting list for that funding, for those loans?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Great questions all. I don't think it's underutilizing it. I think that the program took a significant amount of time to stand up because we were working with no less than 7 different utility partners. And we had to have 3 bank accounts for each of those independent utility partners to make sure that we weren't mingling the money. We had to have lengthy MOUs agreed to by their council and ours. So it's taken some time to ramp it up, but now that consumers are aware of it and contractors are using it, we're seeing more and more uptake. If I could show you the chart of uptick, you would see that as it ramped up, we did get more involvement. Now here's another challenge. We've run out of money for the buy down and the loss reserve. So we've gone back to the PSC and asked them to continue to fund this for another year to finish out the pilot while we look at finding ways to do a permanent program. And we're waiting on the PSC to determine whether or not they're going to extend the pilot at the worst possible time, since people are freezing right now, right? And these loans can be combined with utility rebates, and they are. These contractors are all pre-qualified through the utility rebate programs as well.
Thank you so much, and I do hope that the PSC gives you the answer that you want there. I guess my other question involving that is, if this does continue, how are you reaching out to consumers? I was unaware, and so I haven't been able to share it with my constituents. How do people find you if they are in need of these loans?
That's also a great question. We just started to do a little bit of direct marketing within the communities, particularly in communities that are underserved communities. This loan program does offer interest rates credit scores as low as 580, which is virtually unheard of in the banking landscape. So we were targeting communities on bus routes, on digital marketing. But we do depend in a great way on contractor connections to the program. Typically, we find that people get connected to this financing when they're dealing with having to replace a system, or they're looking at energy efficiency measures as a home-wide effort. And the contractors are our best source of referral. We could do more with marketing, but with a $2 million budget, we have very little to spend. I think we had $13,000 to spend on marketing for the whole program during the 3-year pilot.
Thank you so much for being here and for your work in this area.
Great. I do not see any further questions, Kathy, so thank you, and we'll see you at your legislative event in a few weeks. We are going to shift now to the solar, wind, and storage industry representatives we have joining us, the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association, the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition Action, the Mid-Atlantic Region Solar Energy Industry Association, and Oceanic Network. And while they're coming up, I'm going to call on Delegate Naraki to introduce his guest. Can you light up, Delegate? Yeah, there you go.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the courtesy of allowing one of our junior delegates from District 7A to join me here by my desk. I've got my son Luke here today, everyone, and he's very excited to learn about all this energy policy here. It's riveting for a 10-year-old.
Have you played the previous 3 installments for him?
He actually has been watching those on his own. I didn't have to. He's going to find those on YouTube and just wanting to learn about all these energy issues that we're learning here about in the committee.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the committee. And if you get really bored, there's snacks in the back. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our panel is up, so I'll let you all take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Guyton. My name is Robin Dutta. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Solar and Storage Association. We are a regional trade association that was founded back in 1984, representing then just solar companies, solar water heating, and a little bit of photovoltaics. Today, it's mostly photovoltaics and now energy storage companies. We were founded as the Maryland, D.C., Virginia Solar Energy Industries Association. We've had a lot of changes in policy since 1984, now 2 repeals of the investment tax credit, but also great advances in state policy because of the Maryland General Assembly. And with all of the load growth in the region, with everything happening at PJM, with the maturation of the solar and storage industries what we see today is very different from 1984, as well as in the late 90s when net metering policy was first passed, 2007 when the solar carve-out in the RPS was first passed. But I'm really happy to say that when we talk about good clean energy policy, we're talking about good energy policy. And so I wanted to focus my remarks in looking at the affordability landscape as we see it today and how solar and storage fits in there and the benefits, and then what we can do if our technologies are able to be adopted more widely. The slides I'm using is from a webinar that we hosted a couple weeks ago. And so I'm just going to be skipping through it, and I have screenshots in my written testimony from it as well. The first slide here is tracking retail energy rates in Maryland over the last now 6 years. This is the red is commercial, the blue is residential, and the yellow is industrial retail rates. And the biggest takeaway here is that they're much higher than the green, which is the trends of per capita income, as well as median income and the CPI, Consumer Price Index. So retail rates are outpacing inflation, which, as everyone knows, has already been very high the last few years. Here we go. Load growth. The data doesn't show it yet in Maryland, although all the discussions of data centers does suggest that it's going to be more. This is looking at PJM, the Regional Transmission Authority, and the years there denote the annual, the projections given in that year. And you can see in 2023, 24, and 25, these represent the biggest recalculations and the biggest rises in expected growth. It is this growth and this expected demand in PJM that is a major variable in pushing up capacity prices in the PJM auctions and causing the constraints and thus the price increases that have been coming down already, socializing into Maryland rates. This is tracking those actual capacity auction prices. And the line shows the last auctions had federally mandated price caps. The next auctions currently are not expected to. And at least what I've heard anecdotally, without the price caps, the clearing price for capacity was going to be much higher. It cleared around $329 a megawatt per day and was instead, could have been as high as over $500. An important note here, and I'll get back to it, in regulatory testimony from Pepco Maryland, they cited that reducing peak load can translate to over $7 million a year in savings. I'm going to talk about how solar and storage can realize these types of savings, and even at a bigger scale. When we're looking at growth, load growth and then cost increases, there's two big things, components to it. There's the cost of energy, and there's the cost of the grid and the delivery of that energy. This chart shows the change in investment and cost that utilities have put into distribution and transmission. The green being distribution, the red being transmission, the dotted line, again, comparing that to inflation. And so the growth of these, of this investment far outpacing that of inflation. And so this is being also then felt in the retail rates because typically, as you all know, utility projects and utility-driven projects are funded through the rate base. We're going to go back a couple slides. I showed the grid investment slide because it's important to note that we're not getting as much benefit from the grid. The dollars spent are not being used as efficiently, and that's because of higher peak demand. More and more infrastructure is being used to serve only in the peak periods when energy demand spikes. The concentration in peak demand isn't just in spiking demand, but it's just like, economics 101, supply and demand. When something is more scarce, it costs more. So the concentration in peak periods is also in price. And with retail rates, that higher price in the peak periods gets socialized across rates. The yellow line here, this bell curve, is solar generation. This is actual demand and solar generation from June 24th, 2025, one of the hotter days and higher peak days of the year in last year. And you can see just from general solar generation, this is Maryland. There's not a ton of battery storage tied to solar. So this is largely just the natural solar generation curve. So we already have a good amount of overlap over that peak period in the hours of 15 to 20. Add in battery storage, and the ability of this generation that is produced during the day can be better utilized when the grid needs it the most in order to offset that peak demand and also then the peak pricing. Going here. And when we're talking solar and storage, I should also emphasize the cost effectiveness. The top arrow here points to utility scale solar and storage. And it is one of the lowest cost options at the table. Utility scale solar is the lowest cost, especially when you're looking at peak demand, but it's the lowest cost for new generation. And utility scale solar can come online much faster than other central generating types, in particular natural gas. So when we're looking at peak demand, it's important to note, how quickly, how quickly different generating types can come online in the real world. We certainly like to come on faster than it is, and we can talk about how that can occur, but this is what we see typically in the United States. And then my last slide looks at more on the distributed generation side. Again, I'm going back to that 50 megawatts, that reduction in peak demand, and how that can translate, again, by Pepco Maryland's testimony, $7 million a year in capacity-related savings. Translate that to the current all solar in Maryland, that gets to 28 to 40 million. Put a 4-hour battery in all of that capacity, that becomes $183 million in savings per year. By reducing peak demand, by taking our distribution loads, by taking everyone's loads at the source and offsetting it at the source. The analogy with energy efficiency is always the cheapest energy that you consume is the one you don't use. The best way, in our opinion, to reduce peak demand, and the most cost-effective way, is to do so via private capital and by reducing peak locally in the distribution grid. And the numbers in the analysis certainly show the savings potential for that. This is what can happen by deploying solar and storage more mainstream. This is what, when we have bills that'll be in front of you, whether that's the Sunrise Act or the Affordable Solar Act, that'll be up in the next few weeks, will be, these are bills that are going to help to encourage solar adoption in a more ratepayer friendly and cost-effective way, as well as making sure that the solar and more storage that can come online will do so for the best interests of Maryland generally. Thank you very much for the time. Look forward to any questions you may have.
Want us to keep rolling? Perfect. Good afternoon, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. My name's Evan Vaughn. I'm Executive Director of MERIC Action, or informally the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. It's an honor to speak before this committee for the first time, coming from the ECM side of the building. Robin touched on a lot of points that I think are really important to the discussion, so I'll try to modulate my comments a little bit to touch on a few additional areas that I think will help round out the picture. Quickly, MERIC Action, we are the essentially trade association that represents utility scale, grid connected, transmission connected, wholesale. Those are all terms that you might hear. Those independent power producers of wind, solar, and energy storage, including onshore wind and offshore wind, that are active in Maryland and across the PJM grid. So we work from Ohio over to New Jersey, down to North Carolina, and back up through Kentucky. But we're based here in Maryland. I live in Maryland, and that's where our business headquarters is. So it's always really cool to get to come in here and talk to you about these energy issues. I hope going forward you'll consider me a resource on some of these PJM issues because they are complex. That is an understatement, and I hope to work through a little bit of that today. So Robin touched on this slide pretty well, so I won't linger on it. I only have 2 slides, But this one just shows the PJM footprint for those who are still getting familiar with that. So you can see the states I mentioned, we cover most of PJM and Merrick Action except for the Illinois and Michigan parts of it. On the right side of the slide, that's just showing the demand curve and how dramatic it's been in demand growth over the last few years. One thing to note is the black line on the left part of that chart, both the top and the bottom, that's how demand growth had been tracking in past years. And you can see it's basically been flat. It's peaked and valleyed, but there really hasn't been the kind of growth that we're seeing. And so I want to speak to why that growth is happening and what it's happening, what it means for Maryland rates. I'm going to try to answer some questions, give you my perspective on common questions I'm sure you'll hear from your constituents. So one of the big ones is why are prices rising? And I'll just caveat that I'm speaking about the wholesale prices, which ultimately feed into retail prices, but there is a degree of separation there. So these trends, while important, are not the whole picture on retail rates. So first of all, really what we've seen within PJM, and this is not unique to Maryland by any means, is a collision between this unprecedented amount of demand from data centers, electrification, and onshoring of manufacturing, which happened in 2024, essentially, at the same time that we had seen a years-long trend of retirements of old inefficient power plants outstripping the deployment of new resources. Deployment is a key theme that I'll come back to in a minute, because that is really the fundamental problem that the entire region, including Maryland, has, is we're not deploying enough energy resources. So you should always ask yourself, as you're trying to address these questions, how do we deploy more, and what are the policies that'll help that happen? And then when we think about, so it was really those two things, the demand rise with the long-standing retirement trend. There were some resource accreditation issues that are out of the scope of this presentation, but that also happened to dampen the value of things like natural gas and solar right at the time when we needed that value to keep the market stable. And so this chart, my second slide, this shows a breakdown of the cost increases in the wholesale market. On the left, and this is from the PJM Independent Market Monitor, by the way. On the left, that's 2024. 2025 is on the right. And what you'll notice here are a couple things. Transmission is the bright orange, so that stayed pretty much stable, the investment in transmission. Energy prices are the dark blue at the bottom. Those have increased the most in absolute terms. And then capacity prices, which you'll hear a lot about, I'm sure you already have, are the light blue box at the top. And that has increased the most in percentage terms, but not in terms of absolute. And the reason I bring this distinction up is that for all the discussion, which I agree with, that we need more dispatchable generation that can be turned on and off, at a flip of a switch, that's not the whole story. And a myopic view that only focuses on dispatchable generation will do a disservice to consumers, because the energy prices are the single biggest chunk that's rising. And here's where my industry comes in. Large-scale solar, large-scale wind, these are the cheapest energy resources on the grid, period, even without incentives or federal subsidies, which are going away in the middle of next year. And so these resources provide a zero fuel cost benefit to the grid. During a week like this, when power prices are skyrocketing, natural gas prices are skyrocketing because of the cold weather, every bit of wind and solar you have on the grid shaves off those high gas prices, which, by the way, Marylanders also use to heat their homes in many cases. And it's the same natural gas that's going into all of that. So it's really, really important that we do take a balanced approach to energy. The Maryland RPS is 50%. That is a balanced approach in my view, and that policy is working well. I think just to close out my remarks, as you can tell, this is a conversation that could go on for quite some time, and I'm sure I'll be back before the committee to speak to this more. But I do want to touch on a couple of recommendations and how I think the state can best rectify this supply-demand imbalance. First of all, as you'll hear from my colleague Jen, get offshore wind done. The U.S. wind project is essentially ready to go, and notwithstanding federal barriers, I ultimately think that project will prevail in court. And that is the single biggest amount of capacity that can come onto the grid, zero fuel cost resource, in the next 5 years, essentially. There's really nothing else that can compare. So we've got to get that project done. Number two, we have to reduce barriers to deployment of other energy resources, including battery storage. Kudos to the legislature last year for passing the Next Gen Act, which I think did a lot to help that, especially for battery storage. Our members are really happy with the Public Service Commission's actions on that procurement for transmission scale battery storage right now. I think that'll result in some real megawatts on the grid. But we also got to look at siting. And then my third item is transmission. Transmission is the bottleneck that's going to stop more energy from being deployed in the state. And it doesn't matter what kind of energy. It's not just wind and solar, anything. There was a solar project on the Eastern Shore that was about 100 megawatts of capacity. That's probably a $150 million project. The cost that that project would have to pay to plug into the grid to do the necessary upgrades, $70 million. That's untenable. If Maryland can't get a 100 megawatt solar project online because we don't have enough transmission capacity, forget about, a big natural gas plant or nuclear or anything else. So we've got to address transmission. I know it's painful. I think there's a better way to do transmission with Order 1920 that FERC is approving this year. It'll let the state take the reins, the driver's seat on transmission, so it's not just being dropped down on you from on high at PJM and by the utilities. And so with that, I'll take a pause, and at the end of the presentation, I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you all for the time.
Just keeping the train rolling. Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Guyton, members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide testimony. I'm Leah Meredith. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director at SEIA, which is short for the Solar Energy Industries Association. We're the national trade association for the solar industries. We have about 1,200 member companies nationwide that really run the gambit of the different facets of the solar industry. So everything from small scale, residential rooftop systems to community solar system, developers of community solar systems, all the way up to large-scale utility solar and storage systems, investment firms, service providers, et cetera. The solar and storage industry employs 5,000 Marylanders. I'm one of them, and is home to about 200 solar and storage businesses. Meeting Maryland's energy needs and staving off the continued dramatic increases in electricity costs is going to require the rapid deployment of all of the above energy strategy. I'm the first to admit that, but such a strategy has to include solar and storage assets, which are among the only energy resources currently primed to cost effectively address the state's near-term energy needs. Right now, 72% of the planned additions to the U.S. grid over the next 4 years will be solar and storage. Put simply, without solar and storage, there's no way to meet the increasing demand for electricity in the PJM states. That said, there are some challenges. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by the U.S. Congress introduced significant barriers to investment in solar and storage, and many projects that are in the earlier phases of development are at risk of potentially being canceled. That legislation, though, along with other actions taken by the Trump administration. My friend and colleague Evan mentioned the stop work order on wind. I share his optimism on that project being successful in court. But eliminate these investment tax credits that the industry had taken advantage of for some time. There are some safe harboring if projects are placed into service before the end of the year of 2027. They are still able to take advantage of some of those federal tax credits. There are, however, additional barriers, tariffs, new foreign entity of concern rules that eliminate the tax credits for projects that contain certain threshold levels of products in the project supply chain that are sourced from adversarial nations. So in this, that's the bad news. The good news is that in this new federal policy environment, state leadership, like from Maryland, is going to be really important. And what the solar and storage industry needs from Maryland to deploy is not to somehow make up that delta, right, from the loss of federal tax credits. It's really to cut regulatory red tape, remove administrative barriers, et cetera. And a lot of these are low and no cost policy options. Last year, this legislative body passed the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, which addressed siting. Siting is a huge barrier in Maryland, particularly for the community solar market segment. And Maryland is fully in the driver's seat when it comes to unlocking the capabilities of solar and storage projects that are connected to the local utilities distribution grid. Maryland plays a really important role in sending strong market signals to the large-scale projects, solar, storage, wind, et cetera. But there are about 250 megawatts of projects currently under review by the Maryland Power Plant Research Program that are connected to the local distribution utility. That's enough to power 26,000 Maryland homes, with several more projects that are also in the earlier phases of the development queue. The majority of these are community solar projects. Those are the facilities that are shared by multiple individual subscribers who receive a credit on their electricity bills for their share of the electricity that that system produces. I'm not going to get into the specifics of some legislation that will be heard in this committee in a couple weeks, but they are really geared towards addressing these, cutting the red tape and addressing these administrative and regulatory barriers to unlock the capabilities of the industry. So I do want to thank Delegate Frazier-Odago for your leadership, specifically around the implementing the automated permitting for smaller scale smaller customer-sited solar and storage systems, as well as Delegate Stein for his leadership on the Sunrise Bill, which will reduce customer acquisition costs for the community solar market segment, and also make sure that OHEB customers in Maryland and those who have the greatest need for financial relief from their electricity bills are able to take the advantage of the bill savings associated with community solar. So obviously, higher electricity costs are already here, but the cost of policy inaction and failing to remove these administrative and regulatory barriers to bring more solar and energy storage online is far greater. Thank you so much. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you. Oh, you had slides, maybe, or there were?
Oh, that's just my fact sheet.
Okay.
Review at your leisure.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jen Barak. I'm the Chief Development Officer with the Oceantic Network. We're a national nonprofit, actually, that was founded in 2013 as the Business Network for Offshore Wind. We work to represent the supply chain that spans 40 states across the country for the next-gen ocean economy. It is great to be back before ENT. Like others said, I hope that you see me as a resource, and I have a lot of slides. I'm going to skip over some of them for the sake of time, but I'm happy to come and see anybody or answer questions today. Oops, how do I go back? There we go. This slide is just to show you how enormous the national offshore wind energy landscape has become. There are over 60 leases in the hands of private developers that could build 70 gigawatts of energy, affordable, reliable, and predictable energy. This slide shows some of the other national statistics. At the top in green, there's, including Maryland, over 100 gigawatts of energy commitments for offshore wind from states in law. I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects on the right that are under construction from Massachusetts down to Virginia, including our neighboring state. Virginia has the CVOW project, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, which is 2,600 megawatts. In the middle, we have 19 gigawatts of shovel-ready projects, which is where US Wind's project sits. And I have to highlight, because a lot of our members are part of this, $25 billion in supply chain investments in ports, vessels, cables. It is fueling our economy and creating a lot of good-paying jobs. So I'm skipping over. The federal attacks have been numerous. I will get to those in a minute because there have been some exciting court decisions. A little bit digging deeper into the leases on the East Coast. In green are those 5 I mentioned that are under construction. And there's a big red box around them because on December 22nd, the Department of Interior suspended their leases and said they could no longer construct. These are giant billion-dollar projects that are delivering power to the grid in construction. And then in the middle are the additional, so that's 6 gigawatts, an additional 10 gigawatts of shovel-ready power. So US Wind, it's tiny to see probably from where you're sitting, but lease number 6 is US Wind's, and there are an additional almost 10 gigawatts of shovel-ready projects that, as Evan was talking about, can come online same cost, if not cheaper, and just as fast as nuclear or natural gas. So next slide is First day in office, 9 o'clock at night, the president issued a wind moratorium that basically put a hold on all new permitting and leasing, and 17 states, including Maryland, filed for harm, economic harm, to their states. And on December 8th, the judge awarded to the states and vacated that memo. Oceanic was part of it. We had a testimony from 17 suppliers with the economic harm caused. So Maryland has been fighting back, which is great. On the next slide here, I wanted to show, as I mentioned, those 5 projects that are now under construction. When the president stopped those leases on December 22nd, within days, these 5 companies filed suit against them. And as you've heard a lot from PJM, I think you're going to be hearing from them, they don't often weigh in this explicitly, but they filed an amicus brief on the CVOW project. So this is Virginia, this is our grid, that suspending and delaying this 2,600 megawatt project would cause irreparable harm to the 67 million ratepayers that it served. They put that in court, and that was part of the judge's decision. There were injunctions on 3 of the projects in the last few weeks, and then just yesterday on the Vineyard Wind project in Massachusetts. The president said that there was reasons for defense and national security that were confidential, that these projects had to be stopped. The judges saw all of that confidential information. They heard about all the economic harm. They heard from PJM, and they still said these can be mitigated. Just for clarity, these projects spend years coordinating with Department of Defense to mitigate them. And so they are luckily now building again. CVOW just put in a giant tower yesterday. It's pretty exciting. Happy to take anyone on a boat to see it. If you'd like, let me know. So I'm skipping over the lawsuit recap that I mentioned. Wanted to talk about US Wind for a second. You are likely aware now that in 2024, Ocean City Mayor and City Council filed a lawsuit against the Bureau of Energy and Ocean Management, BOEM, you'll hear about them a lot in this committee, against their construction operating plan. And initially, BOEM defended the plan, again, years of work, thousands of pages of documents. Recently, in December, a judge said that the federal government, because now under the Trump administration they wanted to reprimand their COP, a judge said they can't do that without analyzing it. And so this case is still being litigated. As we've all noted, we are confident in US Wind's project to move forward. It is fully permitted. We just have to wait for this to play out. I do want to talk, you've heard a little bit about capacity factors and baseload power. You hear that as a criticism of offshore wind. It is baseload power, as I noted. PJM weighed in. It's cost competitive. Not just these 5 projects under construction, but there is a project that Ørsted built in New York called South Fork that's been on the grid for a year and a half. So we have a year and a half of data that shows us they create energy when we need it, in the afternoon and the evening, and in the winter months, they're strongest, like right now, when we need it. So again, it is a big part of the solution. And what I want you to take away from today, my remarks, is we just need the federal government to get out of the way and clear a lane, and we can help solve this energy crisis with offshore wind. A little bit more about Maryland. The US Wind project is one of 3, so Ørsted and Equinor also have projects. US Wind is building 1.7 gigawatts, and they have made a lot of significant investments here in Maryland to reach our 8.5 gigawatt goal. Hellenic Cables in Baltimore is working with them on their cables. Crystal Steel on the Eastern Shore is a steel fabricator. Sparrows Point Steel will be rolling the monopiles that will come from the heartland in Ohio and Kentucky with Nucor Steel. So a lot of huge investments, and there's already 50 companies in Maryland that are on projects up and down the East Coast. They didn't wait for Maryland, so it's a great job creator. I always get asked about specific timelines. Of course, you should talk to US Wind directly, but you all re-awarded new ORECs that could go to them in 2025. They are ready to start 4 phases of construction, with the first being completed around 2029. As I mentioned, they've made a $500 million investment in the Sparrows Point facility, and they're working with IBEW and United Steelworkers. And then the other 2 projects need offtake agreements, and so we'll be working with those on the coming years, but there's no legislation for that this coming session. I also hear a ton about concerns around fisheries. The CVOW project in Virginia, Commercial fishing is ongoing as they're under construction. And one of our member companies, Atlantic Capes, is a global fishing company. They are working with 20 boats. They've got 16 fishermen making about $250,000 a month, ferrying workers back and forth, doing sea surveys. So it is a place where there can be dual use in the economy there. And then there's also a picture, you probably can't see it, but there was an 800-pound fish caught by recreational fishermen at the base of the foundation of one of the Seabow constructions. So it's definitely a place where there can be a lot of collaboration, and we would love to help foster more of that. On the legislative front, as Evan mentioned, the Power Act that was passed here in 2023, we are talking with the bill sponsor, so Vice Chair Charkoudian, about some amendments to make sure the transmission piece can happen and can incorporate other needed forms of renewable energy on the Eastern Shore, just not offshore wind. So please talk with her about amendments. And then looking forward, like I said, we're cost competitive with nuclear and gas, but offshore wind gets treated differently, so we would just like to have parity. With that, I see lots of red flashing questions.
Great, thank you. We'll turn to Vice Chair Guyton.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. This is a really exciting briefing. I do want, and I love the concept of offshore wind, but I know a lot of that's federal barriers right now, so I'm going to speak to the first three presenters. You all mentioned that there were regulatory barriers and administrative barriers to deployment of a lot of these projects that I guess are sitting in queue at this time. And a few of you, I think Mr. Dutta, you said, and I'm going to tell you what we need to do, but I never heard that, right? So I do see that, Sia, in your written testimony, you have a policy roadmap for us with some very specific items that we might could take into consideration to help clear this queue and help this start rolling in the right direction. I didn't know if any of you wanted to speak more specifically to some of the barriers that you think that we should address. And also, while you are doing that, what would that mean to the timeline of getting these projects online if we did address those barriers?
Yeah, I can take a stab. Yeah, so really for some of the work has already been done in Maryland around siting, as I mentioned with the Renewable Energy Certainty Act, but there are a lot of permitting barriers still, and even permitting barriers for small scale systems. A couple years ago, was it 2 years ago? Yes. The General Assembly passed Solar App Plus, which is a platform that allows for automated review and permitting of small customer-sited systems. There's been some issues with the implementation at the local level of that legislation, and Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo has a bill to address those barriers in implementation. So that's one example for small, customer-sited systems where folks are wanting to install solar and storage to generate a portion of their own electricity needs. For kind of the medium scale system, community solar, siting, permitting, and also interconnection. Interconnection timelines with the local utilities is a major barrier. The Public Service Commission has started to do some real significant work around fixing some of the interconnection delays, but also around customer acquisition. So the cost of getting subscribers to subscribe to community solar projects. And that is one barrier that the Sunrise legislation, which will be up, I believe, in a couple weeks in this committee, will address by allowing OHEP customers, which is Maryland's form of LIHEAP, to be automatically enrolled into a community solar subscription. They can opt out, and that allows allows industry to be able to reduce the cost of acquiring those subscribers, which are hard to meet. These are the folks who are most in the need of financial relief, and then also providing them access to that relief. But I'll see if my other panelists have something to add.
I might just add, because you covered kind of small and medium scale solar. On the large scale solar side, you'll hear a lot about the PJM queue. It's basically the waiting line that you have to go through in order to safely and reliably plug into the grid. And so they do a lot of analysis to make sure you put a project on the grid, it's not going to cause an issue. There's been a lot of talk about the queue being delayed. PJM has now at this point moved through reforming the queue, and they've gotten to a place where they are pretty expeditiously moving projects out of the queue. It's always good to try to speed things up, and they might be able to do that with an AI partnership that they have, but I think the piece that maybe gets missed in the discussion around the queue is that just because you get out of the queue doesn't mean you're good to go and like everything's hunky-dory. You still have to achieve financing. You still have to make sure that your cost allocation coming out of the queue isn't so big as to kill the project. That was the 70 million I mentioned during my testimony. So the only way to make sure that the developers who have to pay, by the way, the entire full freight of plugging into the grid are able to actually make their projects pencil out, especially when the incentives go away, is to make sure that the grid has enough capacity that the upgrades that the developers are paying for are sort of within the realm of reasonable. So for a $150 million project, you know, it's not $70 million, somewhere less than that. Not necessarily cheap, but it can't be cost prohibitive.
And I'll just close out by just, one, echoing everything that my colleagues have said, but focusing on the financing and kind of the rules of the road. What's going to be very important kind of moving forward is, first, I'll mention Delegate Charkoudian's Affordable Solar Act. Taking that solar carve-out that was created in 2007 for an immature industry to help mature. Our costs have come down in the realm of 80% since then. And so we're now looking at being an industry of volume and building out capacity in a way that it was more about maturation 20 years ago, and today it's about volume. The policy reforms for the solar carve-out would align the program to promoting volume and leveraging all of those cost reductions that have already taken place and can help use the ratepayer funds more efficiently. That's going to help lock in financing better and help make a more clear customer value proposition, especially for distributed systems. And then with net metering, I know there are going to be a couple pieces of net metering legislation in front of the committee, and I know both are geared towards helping to get more storage, helping to align the compensation to be that of, matching the grid benefits. So you're really being compensated for what the system is providing to the grid. And so knowing that and having that set past the current net metering cap is going to give a lot of companies the policy certainty to be able to continue investing in Maryland and going to market here. So it's more about the policy certainty as well as making sure there's available financing. I mean, anything that can be done for the Maryland Clean Energy Center, I always say go for it because they're can be increasingly helpful. But it's much more the rules of the road. And the last thing I'll mention, PC 73 at the Public Service Commission, the order in that docket opined on a lot of different ways in which within regulatory authority, the PSC could streamline rules and processes and help to speed up timelines. Because time in this case is money with construction loans and labor and just how quickly we can build. But there was very little action. So we are also looking at the commission for further action in that docket because that can also help to deploy and help us deploy faster and cheaper.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. Very, very helpful. And Mr. Dutta, I was not pointing you out because you didn't give me the answers because I've met with you so many times. I expect you will have the answers, so I was waiting for them. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Delegate Fraser-Hidalgo.
Chair, thank you all for coming. A couple of quick questions that I want to throw out. One, you talked about policy certainty, and Jen, you talked about the policy uncertainty or uncertainty that is really wreaking havoc on offshore wind. And then I think, Evan, you talked a little bit about the PJMQ. So when we talk about industry and we talk about sending signals like the state, whether it's through legislation or whether it's from the feds or whether it's from FERC or the PJM, can you talk a little bit about what uncertainty does to penciling a project? For example, we've heard multiple times about the PJMQ, but one of the things that you touched about, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, and that is that 4 or 5 year queue. Like, what does that do to a project? And Jen, same thing for you. Like, how does that change?
Maybe I'll just start quickly and then hand it to Jen and others. I think fundamentally, the longer you draw out any capital project, these are big $100 million investments if you're talking large-scale projects. If you're drawing that timeline out, 5, 6, 7 years, you start to run into just the uncertainty that plagues any project. Is there going to be a war in Ukraine? Is there going to be a OPEC action that hurts fuel costs or steel prices going up? And so that's why it's so important to make that queue process as short as possible. And again, I appreciate what PJM's done to speed that up to some extent, but there's still problems with policy certainty. Both the federal level, it kind of speaks for itself, but even within the market, the capacity market has been subject to a lot of political interventions in the last few years. And I'm not saying they aren't without merit, but the more that the capacity market and the energy market get impacted by big policy changes, the less that a company can bank on that. That's the problem with battery storage, for example, why we needed the next gen incentive last year, and thank you again for passing that, is those storage projects, even though they would see high value from the capacity market, they had no way to pencil that 20, 30-year investment based on 1 year of high prices right now. It's really about that long term. So long-term certainty is key for any kind of incentive or policy program.
It's a great question, and thank you, Delegate. Now that I work all over the country, what I've been talking with our staff about is focusing on what we can control. We have, over 300 companies that we work with, and many of them are global, whether they're a vessel operator or an energy developer. And so in this room, you can't control what the president is doing, but you all are going to be able to consider this session changes to a bill we passed in 2023 when we didn't anticipate these delays would be happening. We're not on track to meet a 2027 deadline for issuing a transmission RFP in the Power Act. And so you all could consider delaying that a few years because there's some concerns around what FERC might approve or not, but also it takes 6 to 8 years to develop the transmission that we'll need. So US Wind already has their transmission plan. It was part of their OREX. Ørsted already has their transmission plan. So this is for Equinor's project, which will start happening in the early 2030s, probably 2035. And so what we've been talking about with some of our shared member companies is Maryland can send a signal to the supply chain that we're serious about generating more energy. And to the Eastern Shore, where I know someone that was at a forum we were at recently whose energy bill was $1,000 a month, and they pay a lot of congestion prices out there. And so what we're going to put before you, I think some amendments coming from those bill sponsors are making it very clear that this transmission project that Maryland can hopefully work with other states to do so we can control that. We're having conversations with New Jersey and Delaware and Virginia to be working together on transmission. So encourage that to happen, but then also support these amendments that would say very clearly, because apparently there's some concern from the PSC that there's intent versus intention. So make it very clear transmission should get built for all energy generation in Maryland, especially renewable on the Eastern Shore. That'll lower prices and then provide certainty to developers that are going to have to reserve cables and ships and things years out ahead of time is the way I'd answer that. There's also some considerations at the federal level for streamlining permitting. We work a lot now with NOIA, the National Oceanic Industry Association. A lot of our member companies work in oil and gas. Everyone is saying we have to stop attacking fully permitted billion-dollar energy projects, or global companies are going to stop building them here, and that's bad. So I encourage you to talk to your members of Congress to speak up in support of offshore wind generation.
Thank you. And then a separate question, it's kind of, I guess, more for Robin and Leah, but Leah, you had brought it up. When it comes to residential and kind of small industrial solar development, what percentage of a project do you think can be saved by soft cost cutting? The 30% federal tax credit has gone away. So the question is for your industry, like how do you help mitigate what that means? So what do you think best case scenario, what we can do, like what percentage do you think that can save?
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a percentage. I can certainly get back to you on that, but I do know that delays in getting a small customer-sited solar storage system permitted is the #1 cause for why projects are canceled. A lot of times customers will see wait times from their local jurisdiction that has to review and issue the permit of 3, 4 months or longer, up to 6 months even. And really, a lot of these systems can be installed in a day, sometimes 2 days if it's a slightly larger system. Let me get back to you on an exact percentage, unless Robin wants to tap in, but I'm very.
Come on, I've asked you guys this question a couple times now.
I would defer to Sia's research team for percentages, but when you have project attrition, and Chess has actually been partnered on two reports, one that just came out on permitting in Maryland, I think yesterday or today, and then one in Virginia that came out back in the fall. And when you have attrition between when a letter of intent to build the system and the customer agreement to when it actually gets permitted, if that delay is in the matter of weeks, the customer pulls out about 18% of the time due to those delays. So that does speak to, and when you've done the work on a project and then the project dies, like in any industry, you now have stranded costs. And so that then builds into the overhead that then has to be recovered in the projects that do get to the finish line. It hurts financing. It increases labor costs because if you have counties that require wet signatures where permit officials may or may not be available, or there's uncertainty as to when the appointments can be, or if there's the delays, there's all the time spent. When you have different permitting requirements, whether that's structural versus engineering design or electrical design from county to county, making sure that you are matching the requirements to the right county takes time and effort. And so standardizing that lowers costs overall across kind of a few different categories of project cost. My general understanding is that, with the amount of soft costs, it could on its own, when we're looking at financing costs and moving to a more instant and automated permitting system in a state, you do get, you can offset the loss of the ITC. Exact numbers we'll want to get back to you on that, but directionally, it's a much greater percentage of total system cost because we've been able to get our hard costs down so much. So the soft costs, by and large, are the biggest source of cost reduction.
Thank you.
Delegate Snaraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. I've already had a chance to meet with some already, so I'm really trying to dive into these issues, and I appreciate that. As someone that's new to these issues, like everyone here, I do have a couple questions, if that's okay. I have two, Mr. Chair, if that's all right. So the first question, there was a comment made about offshore wind being baseload power, that it can be baseload power. I think that's great. My only question to that would be, are there any circumstances where we have to turn turbines off? Are there any weather conditions where we cannot run those?
Great question. And I'll reach out to your office to come and sit with you. I'd love to do that. We had a conference in New Orleans a couple of years ago, and they were developing hurricane-ready turbines for out in the Gulf. There can be instances, but no power generation is constant. And just like we can predict 24 hours out what the weather's going to be like, they can turn the turbines and adjust them according to the weather. So the stat I gave, I think in June of 2025, was that it was 90%, providing power 90% of the time, but they are not constant, and that's why they are a part of the solution. We support an all of the above solution. So they would be part of the mix. I do remember, I think this recent storm was not like Texas a couple years ago, but when I was in Annapolis every day in 2021, there was massive failures in Texas on fossil fuel plants not being able to be onto the grid. So I definitely think it's a combination of wind and battery and solar and others, but Evan is more the expert that I would say to answer this a little bit more too on the capacity factor calculations.
Yeah, Jen basically captured it. I think the only PJM Maryland specific wrinkle I would add to it is if you look at the effective load carrying capacity, which is PJM's essentially how they measure, how much they can depend on a resource during a critical reliability window. what their numbers show is that offshore wind, especially the first couple of projects, because they really add a novel element to the grid, a new resource that isn't really reflected, because the wind resource offshore is very different than the wind resource on land. And, during this storm, actually, we saw, well, I guess the bottom line is it's comparable to a gas plant, offshore wind, in terms of like how PJM can count on it. In this winter storm, we saw winds in Illinois actually performing really well, so land-based wind. If you add offshore, it helps where you've got these different resources. Prices were actually negative in Illinois for a couple of reasons. It wasn't just wind. I'm still kind of looking at the details. But, if you have that kind of zero price resource, zero marginal cost resource, it really can, in a winter storm like this, or another extreme weather event, add a lot of value for consumers, because you're taking the stress off of the gas system, off of the nuclear plants if something were to go wrong in one of those facilities.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I look forward to following up more about that. My other question, though, is we talked about briefly, I think you talked about briefly, ma'am, about concerns from the Department of Defense with respect to Norfolk and those areas. I've had some federal briefings about this issue because I'm really trying to get myself up to speed. Those concerns weren't presented to me as minor or necessarily super easy to resolve some of those radar issues. You kind of said that they're really somewhat easy to fix. That's not the impression that I got. So could you walk me through why I'm getting from federal officials that there's like some serious national defense issues with that? Obviously, Norfolk is a slightly different circumstance than Ocean City, biggest naval base in the world there. Yep. Doesn't mean, though, that there couldn't still be national concerns if we put them off of Ocean City. So why am I hearing from one side that there are serious and complicated national defense issues, but then here in this presentation, it's kind of, well, they're really easy and we could just move along with those. So I just kind of, I want to cut through the noise there and understand the issue.
Sure.
And Jen, just to save Delegate Morgan some time, Pax Rover definitely flies over the area. So, that you can just address that right now and save Delegate Morgan a minute.
Yeah, this one really well.
So I would say don't take my word for it, because I haven't seen the confidential documents, but 4 federal court judges have. And it wasn't that they said that they were minor, but they said they were mitigatable, and to stop billion-dollar projects that are under construction when the concerns are more when they're operating was what the courts said. They issued injunctions and said that the administration couldn't stop them from being under construction. The administration also didn't stop the South Fork project up in New York, that's running, or CVOW's 2 pilot projects, or the pilot projects in Block Island that are operational and putting power on the grid. My understanding is that I think almost weekly when the projects are running, they meet with the Coast Guard and Department of Defense, a whole team, to talk about if there are any interferences and how to mitigate them. There are things they can do to their structures. And I would also say that China, the president recently incorrectly said that China isn't developing offshore wind power. They are the global leader with 800, I think, gigawatts on the grid. And if there were significant concerns, you would think that they wouldn't be building more. Also, what happens, and these are all confidential briefings DARPA puts together, which I forget what stands for, another federal entity, but some countries, like in the Netherlands, actually put radars and other defense trackers on the wind turbines, and developers are open to doing that. So we have a lot of military companies that work in the dual space that are member companies of ours, and so my response is that the risk is mitigatable and the need for energy outpaces that. And we also, as a security risk, relying on other countries for energy generation is a national security risk. And so we support building these projects and figuring out how to utilize them and mitigate any risk. And these judges said that it was very possible. There's one more case to be decided, I think, February 2nd.
I think just one 2-second addendum is that these projects have been under consideration for over a decade at this point, including during the first Trump administration. And so presumably, I'm willing to believe that national security issues can arise that didn't previously exist, but I think that it really depends on this administration showing, in the evidence, in these confidential sealed court documents, that there actually is a national security concern. We take these concerns really seriously in the industry, certainly don't want to harm national security. I think there just has to be a very high standard of proof when it comes to, derailing a project which is already, far, far, far down the investment path. And we are counting on, as PJM has said, to deliver electrons to the grid.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. I'm still learning. So I had one clarifying question. I think it was Evan. Are you in person? Okay. You talked about transmission being a bottleneck, and I was trying to take notes and listen at the same time, but I think I got lost. Can you just go back to that part and explain a little
Sure.
bit what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is for large-scale projects that plug into the wholesale transmission grid, as a private developer, and Maryland, of course, is a deregulated market, so
Right.
private developers that I represent are the ones building the energy projects. You have to, at the end of the interconnection queue, once you've been studied by PJM and they say, you know, we can plug you in safely, but we have to make these upgrades in order for that to happen. The result of the interconnection queue is something called an interconnection study agreement. And that agreement is between the developer, the wind farm or the solar project or the battery, or any resource for that matter, and the utility, which owns the wires. And they basically, the developer says, we agree to pay, however much money to do the upgrade at the substation or build a new line here or whatever. And the utility agrees, we will effectuate that upgrade. It's our property, so we'll have our crews go out and build the upgrades. And so there's two ways that you can get snagged up there. One is if the project is allocated a cost that's too high for the project finance to bear. And so, it's all dollars and cents. At a certain point, a project's not going to pencil out and it doesn't make economic sense to build it. So if those upgrades come back and they're too expensive for the project to make sense, the developer's going to walk away because you're not going to throw good money after bad. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, which I don't have good data on, but anecdotally I've heard that it's happening, is sometimes, it can be hard to parse. I'm not attributing bad faith here, but it can be hard to parse how utilities are prioritizing those upgrades that they're making to effectuate the interconnection agreements. It may just be they have another thing that they didn't realize they were gonna have a supply chain constraint or something. I'm really not trying to, imply the utilities are doing anything wrong, but things can happen that can derail these complicated, multifaceted projects, including, the availability of transformers and switch gears and conductors, all the things you need to build a transmission upgrade. So to turn it into an action item, I think what the state can do is to look at, where does Maryland really need to make transmission investments, not specifically for renewables, but to just make sure that you can have, enough electrons generated in the state and enough electrons brought into the state to keep rates reasonable, and to find ways to either expedite those projects or subsidize or finance them in some way, with the end result being a payoff that ultimately benefits consumers. It's not just paying for the sake of paying, it's paying to have a greater benefit down the road. And so this is where the really tough stuff comes in, is how do you, as state legislators who are responsible for keeping the lights on, ultimately PJM's responsible, but you also have to make the policy environment right. How do you convince your constituents that we need some transmission upgrades, even if they might not be popular? And I think the state has some tools like the Power Act that allow for those dialogues to happen, to really figure out how do you meet as many community needs as possible with these transmission lines. And they're not just being basically come down on high and say you have to do this or the lights are going to go out, because nobody likes to be told that.
Right.
So.
And so if I can just follow up.
Sure, please.
On two fronts, and then I'm done, Mr. Chair. One, how you talked about electrons in and out, how much, because I'm hearing different opinions about generation and what we need versus what that we don't need. And I guess the question would be for anyone is, what is it that we need? Like, more stored during summertime or fall, so then we have something more stored. I don't even know what I'm talking about. More grid capacity when we're in these cold months now, kind of a save and bait and switch type model. But what is the number that folks are saying we need in total as it relates to like we're having now, like this very cold front that'll be another snow weekend, and then February will be here, and all of it will go away. I mean, our utility costs will still be high, but still,
sure.
Right. So, what is this magic megawatt number potentially, if there's such a thing?
Yeah. It's a great question, and honestly, it's probably like a 3-hour hearing to answer it, so
Sure.
I'm gonna do
Well,
my
we
best.
can't-
But I'd be happy to sit down with you and like
Yes.
walk through the details,
Sure.
or anybody on this committee
Sure.
for that matter. But I think the bottom line is PJM's job is to balance supply and demand instantaneously, basically every second of the day. And so you've got to make sure that that math problem pencils out. You've got to have the right amount of electrons for the right amount of demand. And so there's a plethora of ways to do that, which is why it's such a long answer. But, you know, ultimately.
Sorry.
No, I mean, it's the right question to ask. I'm just trying to think about how to give you something useful without taking all the time.
I
Yeah,
think-
Robin, if
can
you
I
want to
actually-
jump in, go ahead, yeah.
So the grid is built for peak periods. It's when the maximum demand for electricity. That's going to be on a daily basis. It's in the mornings, it's in the evenings. When you have distributed solar and storage, you can help to offset and meet that.
Right.
Large solar can do that. Wind, obviously. Summer peaks, most electricity, air conditioning, that's when big demand is going to be.
Yep.
And wintertime, it's going to be increasingly winter peaking as well, the grid, because of electrification. And the peaks are only going to increase as more electrical devices, electric vehicles are adopted. So not a number, but just directionally, when thinking about what are the scenarios in which demand is going to be kind of that maximum or driving up that maximum, it's going to be those times of day and those types of uses.
So it's the time and moment conversation that I keep hearing. It's about the time and the moment. Okay.
Yeah, it's like the slide I had about the peak demand.
Yes.
That spike up. It's about being able to meet those spikes in demand in the most affordable way possible.
And it's PJM's job to appropriately manage that balance so we don't get potentially caught in a situation where we don't have what we need at that time and moment.
It's a couple of things. Part of it's PJM. The other is also then the utilities and at the
Yes.
state level, the
Yes,
Public
yes.
Service Commission. And there's a lot of policy that I kind of call PJM-free policy, where Maryland really has much more control over when it's deploying distributed resources or what to do with non-wire solutions, virtual power plants, kind of demand flexibility. Again, a much longer conversation, but there is actually quite a bit that Maryland has full control over
Yeah,
on
we've
this.
got a lot of resources to help individuals. And my last question is essentially just from your perspectives, you're here, you are from the solar industries and wind. It's good to see you, Jen.
You too.
And I heard, I believe, Evan talk about balance. And I guess just from your organizations collectively perspective, what other ideas do you have or have you considered as it relates to certainly enhanced energy affordability for Marylanders? Because that's really why.
Delegate, I'm going to ask you all to follow up with her because we have another panel after this
Okay.
and we have a bill hearing, and each one of you could spend 10 minutes answering that question. And it's a really great question. It's the key issue we're dealing with. So I'll just ask you all to think about a great email follow-up that you can share with the whole committee, but certainly with Delegate Boyce. And with that, we're going to turn to Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you've, several of you have mentioned the battery storage. I know one of the issues that is concerning, especially in some of the counties in my district, is the safety and the training factor of these utility scale battery storage units. So could you expand on what you think would be necessary there and who should pay for it?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. Last year, when the Next Gen Energy Act passed, industry really insisted that there be a criteria for this procurement, that any project meet the National Fire Protection Association 855 standard. So this is not a renewables industry standard. It is a fire protection professionals industry standard applied to battery storage projects. And so those standards have really been effective in reducing the rate of fire incidents at battery facilities. Now, we're talking about lithium ion batteries, essentially the same thing we have in our phones and electric vehicles. That's the most commercially available technology right now. Without going in, recognizing the time, I would say that that NFP standard provides a very high baseline, and then developers often do work, I would say almost universally, although potentially could be one company that does it different. They work universally to work with their communities to make sure that they are providing a community benefit package that is appealing to the community. And for a battery project, that could often include, funding for the local fire department and training to ensure that they are able to respond to an incident at a facility. But as we've seen battery adoption grow in the United States, actually the rate of fires has decreased. And so I think we're heading in a positive direction, but it's an important question. I thank you for raising it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quick to that battery fires are fairly rare. A lot of the fire incidents that have taken place, those energy storage systems wouldn't be built today because they aren't up to the latest NFPA standard. Yeah, but happy to follow up and give you more information on battery storage safety.
Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, cost of storage per kilowatt. I mean, what would storage add to the cost of the electron, really? I haven't heard any estimates on those scale projects.
Yeah, Leah might have the sort of like national levelized cost of energy, but I would say the logic behind the Next Gen Act battery procurement is that getting those projects on faster than other opportunities to bring on firm capacity to the grid has a time benefit in consumer savings. So batteries right now, because of some of, I would say, arcane market rules, are not as able to participate in the PJM capacity market as they otherwise have shown to be effective in Texas and the Midwest. But the way that the Next Gen Act works is it provides an incentive to get those projects out of the queue and built now while PJM works on its market rules, which they are working on. And meanwhile, when those projects come online, that capacity market exposure that ratepayers are subjected to starts to even out because you're bringing supply to even out the demand. And so we'll see when the results of this auction come back, what kind of bid numbers come in. But that's also an aspect of that policy that developers have to compete against each other to provide a competitive price to ensure they're selected. So there's market forces at work to try to bring those costs down. But I would say that PJM in general, it's hard to pinpoint prices because the market's so new. There's basically 200 megawatts of batteries in the entirety of PJM, which is a 180 gigawatt grid essentially. And those are older projects from like 10 years ago. So we're kind of going to see the first trial and error with this procurement.
And it depends on the market segment too. What Evan was just discussing were battery energy storage projects that are connected to the transmission. There's also battery storage that's connected to the distribution grid, like the local distribution grid. And storage, in that case, is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It depends what the job that it's doing is like the value of that asset. It could be like a locational value. It could be a peak shaving on all the benefits of peak shaving that Robin talked about. And also it can act like a poles and wires upgrade where it's taking, it's adding like additional hosting capacity to the grid. So more distributed mid-scale generation projects can actually hook in without doing an expensive poles and wires upgrade to the grid.
Delegate Morgan, and then we're going to switch panels.
I'll go quick. On the solar side, do the solar guys pay for the interconnection fees and the transmission upgrades?
Yes, we do. That's factored into our project costs.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, boss.
Okay, thank you to this panel, and we look forward to your answer to Delegate Boyce's important question about affordability. We will now call up another panel, CCAN, Maryland Sierra Club, Maryland Public Interest Research Group, and the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. Just a reminder to my colleagues, we have this panel, then we have a bill hearing, and then a subcommittee is going to be meeting. So just keep all that in mind as you're coming up with your best question.
There we are. Let's go to the beginning. We're in order. So, keep going back.
Sadie likes to get
No, that's it. Yeah. Keep going back.
There you go.
Then, yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. I promised Patty that I would
Everyone ready? Yes, y'all ready?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm Rebecca Rear, the Director of Climate Policy and Justice at Maryland LCV, and I'm joined by our Executive Director, Tim Coble. I'm glad to be here alongside my fellow advocates, and today we will present an overview of some of the challenges and opportunities in the energy sector, paired with legislation this session that presents the opportunity to address energy affordability by deploying clean energy, which are the fastest and cheapest sources, getting the most out of the grid we have, utility accountability, and efficiencies on the demand side. Maryland LCV is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization working for a healthy environment for everyone in Maryland. You've heard a lot already in this briefing series about where and how energy is produced and delivered to our homes and businesses, so just a quick review. This chart shows the sources of energy we produce here in Maryland. We're part of a regional grid, PJM. So being part of a regional grid means any energy we don't produce here, we get from the energy produced in the other states. And the way we move electricity from where it's produced to where it is needed is through transmission. And the $1.5 billion transmission line in the BGE territory that's being built to replace Brandon Shores and Wagner is necessary from a supply standpoint, but the exorbitant price tag is a result of the failure of PJM to plan for this. So the take home really from this slide is that these decisions, what to build, so represented here, where to build it, and long-term energy and transmission planning all have implications for ratepayers. So when you look at demand, you can see, you already just heard this in the last presentation. So, demand, this slide goes back to, from PJM goes back to 2000, where we can see demand being pretty steady, but now we're seeing that projected demand jumping tremendously with that steep incline happening over just the next 10 years. This is data center projections. This is increase in demand, which Brittany will go into more detail about shortly. And this is also why you're hearing about the need for more generation ASAP. And Brittany and Josh will both get into this, but I just want to make sure to say in the introduction that if we're talking about the immediate future, the fastest and cheapest way to put more capacity on the grid is through solar and storage. We were just in the previous panel talking about ELCC ratings and how wind is competitive with gas, and I just want to say that what the interesting thing about the ELCC ratings is that there isn't one for solar plus storage. So they do solar and then they do storage, but in reality we can have these systems where intentionally and planned for solar and storage work together, and so we would see the capacity factors going up for those systems. But we don't actually, the PJM isn't providing a number for that. And that has implications for what was eligible in the Next Generation Energy Act, expedited CPCN. So I digress. The energy externalities, you've heard a lot about the direct cost to ratepayers, right? And how this shows up in our energy bills. So I wanted to, we were invited, the environmental advocate panel, to talk about some of the other externalities and the other costs that we're seeing because of this. So this pie chart you can see that electricity use, so the way that we produce and use electricity, is the source of 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Maryland. It's the second largest source. And greenhouse gas emissions are a harmful and costly source of local air pollution and also cause climate change. So the cost of not taking action is increasing. This is just one example. That red bar across the top is 2024. And in 2024, there were $8 billion weather events that affected Maryland. So these are costs in flooding and mold in homes, and which can cause or exacerbate asthma. We see the cost of inaction in health costs and in cumulative impacts. And helping alleviate these costs is why deploying clean energy is a win-win for affordability in the most direct sense on your bill, but also when you look at an affordability question more broadly in terms of health and cumulative impacts. And turns out the state actually does have a plan for that. And in the Maryland Department of the Environment released the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan at the end of 2023. And I remember because it was supposed to be like Christmas break, but you got to monitor the website for these things to come out. And it includes a path forward to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions, including by deploying more clean energy. the state's climate targets that we passed in 2022 don't exist just because it would be cool, pun intended, to reach them, but that if the state follows the plan, we are gonna see improved quality of life for people in a number of different ways. And on the slide, you see both the expected public health benefits, so in the hundreds of millions of dollars of public health benefits. Most of that is because we're reducing localized air pollution by transitioning away from fossil fuels towards clean energy. And then it is worth mentioning that most of the health benefits occur in historically disadvantaged communities, which is why you also see a high return on investment because the health cost is so high in those communities. And in terms of economic benefits, by transitioning to clean energy and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we are expected to see household energy cost savings in the range of $2,600 to $4,000 per household, 27,000 more jobs in 2031, and growing Maryland's GDP by $5.3 billion. And we're about halfway to our emissions reduction goals right now. So where do we go from here? Well, Maryland LCV has been thinking about this through a Power Maryland Forward framework and supports energy affordability through the deployment of solar and storage, defense against more fossil fuels, and unchecked utility profits while getting the most out of the electricity grid we have. There's a lot we're focusing on in the regulatory space here, including the docket at the Public Service Commission with potential new gas generation in a census tract that has an EJ score of 81.8, so the top 20% of most polluted and underserved census tracts in the state of Maryland, as well as efforts around PJM governance and decision-making. But the legislative proposals this session that fit into this framework include important solar bills, addressing large load users, advanced transmission technologies, and utility accountability, all of which you're about to hear about in more detail. And I will run the slides.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany Baker, Maryland Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We're a group that focuses on climate action and clean energy in the region. So we only operate in Maryland, Virginia, DC, and on the federal level. And we believe in people-powered climate action. So when I'm not here with you, I'm all across the state with my organizing team doing grassroots work in the interim. As the Maryland director, I won't have a lot to add today because my job is to sit at the intersection of the scientists, my colleagues, industry, and ratepayers and ensure that the best proposals that advance the interests of all of these groups move forward. Next slide. And so one thing I really want to emphasize, I'm a visual person, so I'm essentially saying the same thing as Rebecca, but with different pictures. And all of these are my personal pictures. Fossil fuels are harmful and expensive. Historically, disadvantaged communities, Black and brown communities, have shouldered the burden of our fossil fuel energy system with their bodies, with their communities, with less wealth accumulation in their communities because of the fossil fuel sites. Clean energy, on the other hand, has the ability to build family-sustaining jobs, is better for people, is better for communities, and at this point in our society also reduces utility costs. So we're absolutely committed to moving forward clean energy in the state. Next slide. And so many of you have seen this slide. This is one of my infamous slides that I've created, and it maps out the various actors in Maryland's energy space and how they relate to one another. And because we did coordinate for this presentation, my proposals here focus a lot on PJM. We know that's our regional grid operator. We know they've operated for too long without scrutiny, and we appreciate Governor Moore and you all in the General Assembly because in the recent years, you have paid more attention to PJM, its stakeholder process, and found ways to weigh in and try to get them to move things along. Next slide. And so the PJM impact is on the supply side of utility bills. Next slide. And so I won't be very redundant. I mean, Evan and Leah really summarized a lot of the issues that industry is facing when it comes to waiting on the PJM queue. And they also talked about data center forecasts and how there is a need to add new energy to the grid, whether that's in a regional scale, looking at the entire PJM, or in a much more modest fashion here in Maryland. Keep going. And so solutions, right now we have 6 projects that are poised to leave the PJM queue here in Maryland, which represent about 1 gigawatt of energy, which is about the same amount of Brandon Shores, the retiring power plant. And so we're working diligently to advance proposals such as Delegate Fraser Hidalgo's bills this year, such as Delegate Charkoudian's bills, and continuing to follow the Next Generation Energy Act battery storage procurement to ensure these projects, as they emerge from the queue, do have the certainty that they need in order to be constructed here in Maryland. And then the last thing I want to say, we're also working diligently this legislative session to ensure we continue to put reasonable boundaries on data centers, to ensure that the current costs from data centers and also the data center forecasts don't have a heavy weight on ratepayers. And one thing that I really want to point out before I wrap up, the chart that you see on this slide shows how much energy utilization we had from our grid, not Maryland specific, but more nationally, from the early 90s until more recently. And what you see is a boom-bust cycle related to overbuilding right when the internet was created. And we don't want to do that again. We don't want to overbuild, especially new fossil fuels, because data centers might not be constructed to the extent that they're currently proposing. Their technology might improve, and we just don't want ratepayers paying for a lot of new, especially not a lot of new fossil fuel plants when they don't need to. And with that, I'll pass it to Josh.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Oh yeah, I need an actual mic. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Do not press. My name is Josh Tolkien. I'm the director of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. We bring together 70,000 members and supporters in the state who deeply care about the outdoors, our planet, our climate, our air, and our water, and building a healthy future. And we get those people involved at the local and state level. I've been working on Maryland energy policy for about 20 years. I'll try not to sound like Grandpa at Thanksgiving, but admittedly, when I talk about DSP or DER, people do try to back out of the room. The one captive audience I talk to is my 10-year-old daughter, Patty, who made this beautiful poster for school I wanted to share with you all. I guess she's been listening, and she encouraged everybody to pick up trash, save energy, and use less water to help protect the climate. We're all taught this as kids. These are really, really viable strategies, but it's not just a nice thing to teach a kid. In fact, strategies that reduce energy, shift energy load, are extremely effective and cheap and quickly deployable strategies to improve our grid, save people energy, and reduce electricity, and they're hugely underutilized. The majority of people you often hear from will make their money by building more stuff, not encouraging us to figure out how to get more from less. Next slide. So let's get boring. We're gonna start off talking about the overlooked solutions: distributed clean energy, demand response, efficiency, and a smarter grid. Next slide. Let's start off with demand response. Reduce and reshape peak demand. There are proven strategies for us to reduce the peak demand, and the costs that we pay largely stem from this peak demand. That's right now in Maryland, that is peak usage in summer when everyone is running their air conditioners. There are some systems we're already using, like smart thermostats. I used to think that just meant that the utilities made my thermostat go down so it would be hotter. It actually involves cycling, because your AC is not working at all times. It's running and then stopping and then running and stopping. So even if you just phase, you can actually reduce peak demand, same amount of total energy, but reduce peak demand and get more from it. These are great strategies. PEPCO's is a pilot project. Participation is limited. We have not even begun to get close to the potential impact of these policies. There's other more significant strategies, such as time of use pricing, where we actually account for the real cost in the price that we're showing ratepayers to lead to smarter behavior. I heard somebody discuss that there was a barrier around smart meters recently. We've deployed around 90% of smart meters to Maryland utility customers. We are ready to employ strategies like time of use pricing. Next slide. Distributed energy generation is a technical term for all of the generation that are not giant power plants owned by companies being sold into the grid. This is rooftop and community solar. Thank you for the RPS, the Brighter Tomorrow Act. We have net metering, which allows people to make money by generating energy that goes into the grid. And there are pilot projects underway, like the Battery Storage Act. The Next Generation Energy Act had a program to actually start a competitive bidding process for distributed solar. We have some challenges. The permitting process involves a lot of bureaucratic red tape that does not have a huge amount of additional benefit. Sierra Club recently, actually today, issued a report on reducing and cutting the red tape to help Maryland reach its full potential. Delegate David Frazier Hidalgo, I believe, will have some legislation focused on this. And at the same time, I want to commend the Public Service Commission that has been working with stakeholders to roll out what is Maryland's first virtual power plant style system. Next slide. So many terms. Virtual power plant. I ignored it for a long time. I didn't quite understand why we were making up another term. But it is important. A virtual power plant is a way of thinking about aggregating all of these individual actions and resources into a product that you can actually have enter the competitive market, so that when we're trying to get the best cost for ratepayers, and we're looking at whether they're going to buy power or build power or do transmission, we should be looking at somebody, it'll be a third-party aggregator, who will bring solar, storage, batteries, demand response together and say, I can actually meet that demand through these tools that I have. And believe it or not, despite talking for years about vehicle to grid and buses charging back into the grid, we don't have that set up yet. We do not have a system where these efficiency and conservation and generation resources can actually compete to give us the best price. That pilot project is just about set up to go. It was created through the DRIVE Act. Thank you again for that legislation, but I want to note that it was set up as a pilot with a significant number of restrictions. I think last year with the beginning of the Next Generation Energy Act, there was a sense of urgency, some gusto. Most of the policies involving conservation, efficiency, and demand management are tepid. They're dipping the toe into the water, lots of tests, lots of hesitation, lots of cautions. There is huge potential here, but if we want to pursue it on pace with the crisis, we need to move faster. Next slide. Lastly, I want to flag alternative transmission technologies. Zooming all the way out, these are a variety of additive technologies to the larger transmission grid, which provides some of the similar benefits that we were talking about at the local distribution system. For any of the legislators who would like to be bored out of your mind on this, I would love to come and talk with you more about these topics. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Scar. I'm a senior advisor with Maryland PIRG, the statewide consumer group based in Baltimore. Most recently, I've helped lead coalition efforts to strengthen the Empower Maryland program and stop wasteful utility spending with the Ratepayer Protection Act. I've also authored reports on Empower and BG&E's gas pipeline work, which I can share with the committee if we haven't sent them around yet. More importantly, this is my daughter, Sadie Scar-Katzenberg, who just completed a school section on government and politics, so she's excited to be here, even though she's not listening. Marylanders are paying more for energy and getting less. Our investor-owned utilities, particularly the Exelon utilities, are seeing record profits. And I don't have a problem when companies make profits. However, as regulated monopolies, when utility prices and profits skyrocket and customers don't see commensurate benefit, it's evidence of a serious problem and the need for intervention. So we've heard a lot about supply and the needing to address our long-term supply needs in the state. I'm talking about local distribution. As you heard from Mr. Lapp last week, distribution rates don't spike like supply, but they creep up slowly and are harder to bring down. However, unlike supply, they're in direct control of the state. And wasteful spending by the Exelon utilities has dug us into a very big financial hole. When you find yourself in a hole, you don't dig your way out, you put the shovel down. The biggest driver in delivery rate increases is capital spending. Not all capital spending is wasteful, but these projects are financed like a mortgage or high-interest credit card paid off over long periods of time with very high compounding interest. The chart you saw last week from Constellation, which I think we have, looks at the changes in electric supply, distribution, and transmission since 2008. Can you go forward, Rebecca? And you can see that distribution and transmission are the largest factors in the cost increases we've seen. The next slide shows the situation is even worse when you look at gas distribution. This is BG&E gas supply and distribution costs over the last decade. For both gas and electric delivery rate increases, the key drivers have been the Stride Law and the 2020 multi-year rate plan pilot. These accelerated cost recovery programs both reduce prudency review on capital spending and shift financial risk away from shareholders to ratepayers. I applaud you all for making groundbreaking consumer protection reforms to both of those programs in the Next Generation Energy Act last year. However, we may still need your help to fully correct for those failed policies. As you can see on this chart, BG&E gas delivery rates have tripled since 2010. And gas customers didn't notice that rate increase at first because their gas supply rates plummeted at the same time. The consumer gas supply savings masked the uptick in BG&E gas delivery rates, and what should have been a decade of relatively affordable home heating was lost. Now, BG&E gas customers are paying up to $2 for delivery for every dollar we pay for the gas to heat our homes. This is the next slide. This is true even considering a 24% increase in gas commodity prices last year. I think that's my bill from a month ago. Because of Stride, BG&E has undertaken a wholesale replacement of its gas system for new higher pressure lines, prioritizing installing higher pressure pipes over addressing the most at-risk pipes, like bare steel and cast iron. Instead of doing a targeted repair or replacement of those pipes, Operation Pipeline has served as a blunt and aggressive gas pipeline replacement program that requires the replacement of plastic mains and service lines, as well as functioning regulators in addition to at-risk pipes. Maryland PIRG's recent analysis of BG&E's 2025 project list found that not only has BG&E not properly prioritized safety with the program as now required by the Next Generation Energy Act, their strategy may actually be slowing the work to repair or replace the most at-risk pipes. And if BG&E completes its planned $4 billion in Stride-related work, it will cost ratepayers $19.5 billion to pay back. This is the next slide. As in statewide, gas customers are looking at a bill close over $30 billion for all the gas pipeline work across utilities. Washington Gas just proposed an $82.5 million rate increase and is arguing that it doesn't need to change its gas pipeline plans in light of the Next Generation Energy Act. But with forceful action from you and the PSC, we can protect Washington Gas customers from the pain that BG&E customers are already experiencing. You can go, I think we're a couple of slides ahead. That's the price. The multi-year rate plan pilot has been the biggest driver in Exelon's electric delivery rate increases, particularly for Pepco and Delmarva customers. According to the Office of the People's Counsel, rate increases under MRPs since 2020 have been at least 40% higher than rate increases in Maryland from 2006 all the way through 2020. Until 2020, the way utility rates were set in Maryland was that utilities spent money to maintain the poles, wires, and pipes that they needed to deliver electricity and gas. If a utility ever wanted to increase rates, they would go to the PSC and have to make the case by showing receipts and the money spent to justify their case. The PSC would decide if that spending was reasonable and prudent and only then increase bills. As you've heard, some utilities in Maryland rarely come and ask for increases. While imperfect, the system provides a natural disincentive for wasteful spending. The money going out the door above approved rates may not be recovered, so investors were cautious with increased spending. In 2020, things changed when the PSC launched the multi-year rate plan pilot. It's a reverse of the traditional process. Utilities asked for approval for spending up front by showing plans and forecasts of increased spending. The PSC decided how much of that increase to approve, and then it was phased in over 3 years. This happened again in 2023 for BG&E, and despite being pre-approved, which lowered their financial risk, their profit rate remained high. The system encourages utilities to forecast massive spending, giving them more opportunity to profit, especially on these expensive capital projects. And so we applaud the legislature for prohibiting the reconciliation process. You can go to the next slide. However, Exelon is already pushing for a loophole. They're asking the PSC to establish what they call an earnings risk sharing agreement, which is basically just a fixed rate reconciliation tool. Until we end multi-year rate making altogether, the incentive to project and spend massively is strong, and we're still waiting for the PSC on their decision for how they're moving forward. So in closing, I just want to highlight a few things. Sky-high delivery rates are hurting all Marylanders, regardless of income, as well as local and state governments who are some of the largest utility customers in the state. These increased costs are decimating budgets, exacerbating our state deficit, and diverting taxpayer dollars from essential services. You have the power and authority to take immediate and forceful action to stop wasteful spending that's driving up our bills and direct the PSC to right-size utility profits. Ultimately, we need your help and the Public Service Commissions to continue to ensure our utilities are positioned as partners as we navigate the future of energy in Maryland. Thanks for your time.
All right, thank you all, especially our junior advocate. We will start with Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today and for engaging on such a very important topic to all Marylanders. I believe that BGE last week suggested that the state should direct them to build clean energy resources, such as battery storage and community solar and all of those other ancillary items. And so should those developments, in your view, be open to competition to other entities? And if you don't mind elaborating, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a fantastic question because we are all here saying we support clean energy, but we don't support that. I mean, at the end of the day, even with the Empower program, we've seen how the utilities contract out the work and then they get the rate of return. And so the biggest issue I have with the utilities owning clean generation is they want to rate base it instead of using regular market mechanisms to make it cheaper for ratepayers. But the other issues, one, it increases regulatory burden. I mean, today you're going to have a hearing about how much BG&E should pay their executives. Every single thing that we give to them means you have more bills to look at. And so we want to decrease the number of bills you have in the future by not giving them any additional regulated monopoly privileges. And then last but not least, we do think it is a threat to the competitive market. I mean, the panel that you saw before us can speak to it even better than we can, but they already told you for mid-sized projects, BG&E is the one, or BG&E in that territory, but utilities period, are the ones who interconnect those projects. And so we do think that one of the reasons that they want to own clean energy is so they can slow walk us towards our clean energy goals instead of letting the market move us forward at a faster pace.
So I think the question really is, so to your question, should the legislature direct the utilities to build generation? I think how I would respond is my understanding in the law is they actually already have the authority to do that. And so my question is, why is that legislation necessary? Because I'm reading from the Public Utilities article, in order to meet long-term anticipated demand in the state for standard offer service and other electricity supply, the commission, the PSC, may require or allow an investor-owned electric company to construct, acquire, or lease and operate its own generating facilities and transmission facilities necessary to interconnect the generating facilities with the electric grid, subject to appropriate cost recovery. So I think your question, I'm going to answer with a question is that I would need a much better understanding of why more legislation is necessary when in law I think they can already.
Okay, thank you. We can get offline and dive in deeper. I don't want to hold the bill hearing up.
Thanks. Do you know if the IOUs have ever attempted to use that authority, Rebecca?
That is a great question. I do not know whether they have tried to use it before.
It might be worth investigating the history, and then we might know the answer to that question, or maybe it's on them to explain that to us. Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here. I had two questions. One, a little bit more about data centers. I know that's a big discussion, especially as it relates to our increased costs. And so I guess I'm just trying to get your stance on data centers is that you don't mind them being built so long as they create their own power that's not fossil fuel. I mean, I just don't know where you're going. It was a touch on it, but it didn't really get through. If you could talk about data centers a little bit.
Definitely. Thank you for the question. And some people might have different answers, so I'll give the Chesapeake Climate Action Network answer. Is we do believe that data centers can be developed reasonably. They need to slow down. Somebody needs to have the final say of whether they can build or not, and it needs to be related to how much energy we have in our region, in PJM. I have mixed feelings about any bring your own provisions because especially with bring your own generation, that often incentivizes fossil fuels. And so I don't want them building in communities and running their diesel generators or running their own self-built gas plant in communities. So we do believe in responsible data center development, but it needs to be in relation to really smart protections for ratepayers, good energy policy, and then also there are other things to consider like water usage.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Thanks. To give Sierra Club's answer, first just to briefly frame, the crisis that we are currently experiencing in generation was not created by Marylanders. Our energy use has been fairly stable for the last 20 years, thanks in large part to Empower Maryland. So as we're looking at data center and data center growth, concerned about peak usage and prices going up and the massive growth in the capacity market, we should first look at data centers. So I think the framing here is I don't think we have the right regulatory infrastructure set up. So there might be a good theoretical question, could someday it be viable? Yes. Do we have the right regulatory structure to be building data centers right now without the cost of that being profit for data centers and increased costs for ratepayers? No. So I think there needs to be a very, very robust conversation about energy as well as the other environmental issues.
Yeah, and the idea that a data center can potentially think about maybe being in Maryland or maybe being in Pennsylvania or maybe there's a spot in Virginia. And so the demand is inflated.
Yep.
And so some more responsible planning, I think, is in order as well.
Thank you. And then I had another cost about the replacement. When BGE&E was here the other day, they presented about cast iron piping, which they have a responsibility to, I guess, replace. They stated that 11% of the pipes that needed to be replaced, I don't know why this number keeps sticking out to me, it was causing about 84% of their leaks. And so the question I guess I asked them was about if you are pretty much required to replace these pipes, and if you came across a pipe that even though it's probably 100 years old, is somehow still intact, you are required to replace it. And we got to yes, but the answer was yes. And so I guess the question I'm asking you is what is being replaced that otherwise should not be replaced?
Yeah, well, there's two.
That I'm trying to get a handle on.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's correct that they have to be replaced. There are alternatives to replacement, including repair, relining with some very new technology.
For really, cast iron?
Yeah, if it's got an active leak and is broken, it should be replaced. But cast iron has lasted 100 years, might actually last another 20. They have a lot of issues with the joints, and so relining, repair are options, as well as targeted electrification is also potentially a more financially feasible option than putting in new pipes and paying them for 60 years. But then in addition, there's a lot of pipes that are being replaced that aren't cast iron or newer plastic. So for example, last year in our analysis, about 15% of all of the mains that were replaced were not legacy pipe like cast iron or bare steel. And I think about 40% of the service lines, that's the line that goes from your home to the street, were plastic. And then, of course, all the regulators as well. That equipment doesn't need to be replaced. The only reason they're replacing it is because when they're pulling out the cast iron pipe, they're putting in a new higher pressure line. So in addition to this being incredibly expensive and disruptive to our neighborhoods, it can also slow the work to go around the city and address the city and the greater territory and find the leakiest pipes and replace them. So they have a separate project which is targeted at leaky pipes, and that's gone much slower. And so our point is we should focus on that, finding and identifying and fixing or replacing those pipes instead of doing this wholesale replacement, including equipment that doesn't need to be upgraded.
But regardless of if they're targeting ones that need it or don't, we're still paying the cost, correct?
Yes, and it's really the compounding interest that gets us, right? So they put up $100 million, it cost us hundreds of million dollars to pay back over time for their profits.
Thank you.
If I could offer follow-up on the responsivity to people actually reporting leaks would be a really good data point, because my understanding is that the actual response to people complaining about the smell or about leaks does not get the response rate we probably would.
Delegate Nawrocki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone, how are you doing today? Very good, good. So as I was digging out, probably like many of us were over the past couple of days, and honestly, my back's still feeling it a little bit from all that ice, some of my neighbors and I were having some snow shovel conversations. Several of my neighbors have solar panels on their home. They were not functioning over the past couple of days because they were all covered up with snow and ice. We've had several discussions in here recently about sort of the length of battery storage. Some of the numbers we've heard are like up to 4 hours for the grid with the battery capacity that we have now. So my question would be, what would be your all's solution to a situation like this, a pretty significant weather event like this, when batteries aren't gonna, they only last for a couple hours. Solar panels are covered up on a home. Had my neighbors, elderly neighbors with children, not had other sources like natural gas and some other things to power their homes, they would have been sitting in very freezing temperatures. So what's the immediate solution for folks like that, for any of us that could be in that circumstance? What are your thoughts on that?
If I could. I think the immediate solution is that we continue with the system we have. I mean, did your neighbors lose power?
No, thankfully, we did not lose electricity or natural gas.
I don't think any of us are suggesting that we mandatorily require your neighbors with solar panels to disconnect from the central grid or cut themselves off from the gas system.
Okay, so you would, just, Mr. Chair, if I may have a follow-up, is that okay? So you would not necessarily agree with some of the proposals that we've heard from the administration to get rid of all natural gas in the state in the immediate. I know we've pushed some of that back, but there have been proposals over the past couple of years to get rid of the ability to utilize natural gas in this state. So would you say that we should get rid of that right now, or is that something we should do in the future? What are your thoughts on that?
Respectfully, that's not really my understanding of any specific proposal to be imminently phasing that out, so I'd have to respond to a specific proposal. I think most of us are advocating for incentives, strategies, and very, very managed and planned transition, mostly over like a 2-decade time frame when we're talking about transitioning to clean energy.
Sure. So I'm happy to follow up offline, but I can give you some direct quotes from the governor where he's talking about much shorter time frames than that, and we can have further conversation about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Vice Chair Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. I apologize if I zoned out and you talked about this in more detail than I think you did. But I'd like to go back to Ms. Scar and your assistant, Ms. Scar. If you could go back to the very last slide that you sent us on your presentation, which is a proposed earnings sharing mechanism from Exelon to the PSC.
Yeah.
Certainly, we understand the issues that have been created by the rate-based reconciliation that we've seen with large overages. I don't think anyone would argue that that feels fair to our ratepayers. I'm looking at this proposal from Exelon, and I want to ask you 2 questions about this. Do you know the status of this ruling by PSC? And also, are there other proposals out there that we should be looking at?
I don't know the status. So this is from the lessons learned hearing, which the PSC, it's a, 9645 is the BG&E multi-year rate case file. They then asked for updated testimony from stakeholders in the fall after the Next Generation Energy Act went into effect. So that's what this is from. We're waiting on an order on that. So hopefully soon. I know the utilities are anxiously waiting to hear if they should be filing multi-year rate plans this year. But I don't know. There's no statutory deadline for that, for example. And then did you want me to, what was your second, other outstanding decisions?
Well, are there any other proposals other than the one that you shared with us here in the written testimony?
Well, my proposal and other consumer advocates was to stop multi-year rate making altogether and shift back to traditional rate making, which has worked for over 100 years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the gentlelady from PERG. We're over here looking at the slide about gas delivery charges, and for most of the bills I've looked at, it's not a gas bill. The delivery charge is a little bit less. I wanted to see, who sets that charge? Is that a utility fixed rate, or is that set by the PSC?
The delivery rates are proposed by the utilities and approved by the Public Service Commission, and it's a mixture of a fixed rate. That was just a snapshot. I could show you the breakdown where it has, everyone has a flat service fee, $10, $15 a month. It varies, as well as a per usage, like kilowatt hour or therm rate for both gas and electricity. So the delivery rates are the costs we pay directly to the utilities, including their profits and all the operational costs to maintain the wires, pipes, transmission lines, sorry, not transmission lines, those are separate. Those transmission costs are a part of supply. And so gas customers have it broken out separately than electric customers. Some of us get them both from the same utility at PG&E. They still break them down separately because some people don't have both services, and then otherwise you get separate bills.
Why is it so much higher for gas?
Oh, that's a great question. Due in large part to the spending on the gas pipeline replacement program. That's been the biggest driver in the last decade. We've seen PG&E gas delivery rates triple because of the massive capital spending on all of these new pipes and equipment. We've seen similar escalation on electric delivery rates, especially for Pepco and Delmarva. Since the multi-year rate plan was introduced, they've doubled, I think. We're not quite at this, PG&E gas delivery rates, I'd probably say, are the canary in the coal mine across the state as far as like the unaffordable thing, most unaffordable place to be heating your home right now.
Is that also set by the PSC or limited by the PSC, or is that exclusively utility driven?
The delivery rates?
Yes.
Yeah, those are authorized through the PSC, and so this has been a buildup over the last decade.
Thank you.
Sorry, so Emily, just for clarity, you're assigning a lot of that cost to Stride, which
Yes,
gas
Stride-related
sector
costs.
has, but the electric sector does not, right?
Correct, although I would argue the multi-year rate plan is basically Stride for the electric utilities.
Okay, could you just briefly explain Stride if you were able?
Yeah, Stride was a law that was passed in 2013, which provide a financial incentive for the utilities to more quickly replace these aging legacy pipes. There was concern over safety. I would say we do have an old gas system. There are safety concerns. We've had deadly explosions in the last decade, but none of them have actually been tied to the age of the pipes. Unfortunately, that law as drafted did not actually require any safety requirements, and so instead it sort of just led to a rapid spending on new gas infrastructure without us seeing those benefits. So last year, the legislature passed the Ratepayer Protection Act as part of the Next Generation Energy Act, which requires new prudency review, requiring that spending to prioritize safety and demonstrate cost effectiveness. This argument that we have to replace the pipes, we actually have to look at alternatives. Can we repair? Can we reline? Would it be worth to let this one cul-de-sac electrify instead if they all want to? Those are provisions that are now in law, but we're actually seeing the gas utilities fight them pretty aggressively at the Public Service Commission every day.
Okay, so just to be clear, we've had I'll just do 3 legislative terms worth of Stride projects, capital projects building up, and you have to pay those off over years because of how we pay for capital right through the bill. Multi-year plans came online much later, so we've had maybe, let's say, 1 legislative term of multi-year plans?
Yeah.
Okay, so it hasn't caught up yet to that same.
But we're
kind of
headed in that
challenge.
trajectory. I mean, it's gone pretty fast, a doubling, I think, of Pepco, Delmarva, and it's that accelerated recovery. It's sort of giving more authorization in advance of spending while keeping that high profit margin is just exacerbating an existing incentive to spend wastefully.
But there were reforms to both Stride and multi-year passed last year by some other committee.
Yeah,
that will hopefully start to get.
You got to vote on it. But yes, the reforms on multi-year rate making were to require that multi-year rate making demonstrate customer benefit and to end that reconciliation process. As I explained, I still think we might need your help. I'm waiting to see what the PSC says, if there's a loophole, if they still try to go for this. This is our fundamental way we can stop the rates from continuing to spike like they have.
Okay. Thank you very much. I do not see any other questions. So that concludes this briefing, everybody. We'll take about a 5-minute break, get our bill sponsor down here, and then reconvene for our bill hearing. So go fill your waters and do what else you need to do. We'll see you shortly.